Okay, guys, so we're on here. So last time the YouTube gods have frowned on us, and we got a little unlucky with the stream getting deleted. But we're back. We've got the camera recording. I've got a larger SD card. The stream's recording. If you guys want to screen record too, feel free. We'll get a lot of redundancies here. But yeah, so here's the deal. So the battery is running. It's at 100% right now. We got everything set up here. So you guys can start throwing some questions in. And again, this is going to be a little different. I'm going to try to go, chopping through these questions. So I don't think we have any yet. Okay, hold on. Video's glitching. Let's play with this. Let's change that bit rate. Let's put that 5,000. How about that? That should be better. Let me know if it isn't. That should be good. Yeah, so getting straight to it. So no questions yet. So I'm going to go through some of the comments you guys have left. There have been a lot of comments, so I've been trying to get to all the comments. I was successful with that for a long time, but I'm getting a little behind because there's like 2 to 3 every day, and they're all wonderful. Yeah, scare. That's exactly what. That's exactly the problem. So we're streaming. This is the other thing. So we're streaming in 4K. So one of the things, for whatever reason, so YouTube wouldn't. Not that we're going for 24 hours this time or anywhere near it, but one of the reasons YouTube didn't archive the last stream. It went over 24 hours, and they don't guarantee that they'll archive it if it's over 24 hours, unless it's in 1440 or 4K, which is odd. But then it makes sense because it's actually really hard to stream in those higher resolutions. For instance, like even the hardware I was using last time, like anything with wireless video doesn't support K, like nothing. Nothing at all. So we switched the setup here, and we're streaming in 4K, and so that means YouTube should definitely archive it. And so we have that layer of redundancy here as well. But yeah, so you guys can watch in 4K if you want. We also got a nice sharp lens on here. Okay, I guess we got, okay, I haven't gotten any comments, but we got our first question here from Grant. Let me check. This is, yeah. Okay, great. So Grant says, your vids are great and high quality. Do you edit them yourself? How did you learn to do it? Is that a new skill set for you, etc.? Yes. So I had done a little bit of editing in like middle school, like for fun. And then I did like another group project or 2 in high school. I always ended up being the editor for those. And then, yeah, so Grant, this is pertinent to you too, man, actually. So one of the things I realized was like, I'd been following Ito's sort of business model, right? Which is like basically you train all the time, and then you get crazy skills and you post them on Instagram, and you hope you post a little caption, right? It was explaining something, and you hope that people see that and they say, oh, that's really cool, and they like come train with you. So I was doing that for a while, and not that can't work, but I think like you have to have like crazy skills. You have to have the kind of skills that no one else has, right? I think. And probably be really good looking as well. So like I think that and then Ito's got a little bit of an X factor. So I think that model has worked for Ito and Roy, and that's it. And so that was not working for a long time. And when COVID hit, for whatever reason, we kind of decided to do a video about the split handstand and explaining it, you know. And actually, Rozzy had mentioned to me about like longer form content, and so that idea was sort of brewing. And so we did a sort of an instructional video on like the split handstand and just like a tip, you know, because I saw another video of this guy, you know, not knowing what he was doing and like trying, but like, you know, not having like proper kind of instruction. And that did really well, you know, so that was, okay. And then basically from there, over time, I just started realizing, okay, you have to give value with like the content you put out. And you also need to, like, you can't waste people's time, right? Like it should be interesting, it should be valuable, and you can't like drone on, you know? So editing is a really powerful way to do that. So I started looking into, and Grant, you know how like these things go, right? When you're a movement teacher, like we get pretty good at like finding new disciplines, researching them, finding out who are the people to talk to, right? What are the tools we should be using, and then like diving in and like absorbing it, you know? And so the tool was DaVinci Resolve. I figured that out. Although there's some debate, but I think DaVinci is the best. And then, you know, a little bit of trial and error, but YouTube's really nice where it gives you analytics. It gives you retention analytics, where Instagram gives you almost nothing, right? YouTube will tell you basically how good your video is, right? Like which parts were boring, where people clicked off. And so that's like a really, like such a powerful feedback loop, right? Because like when we learn skills, what you want is, you know, a coach or someone or anything, or just knowing like what was a mistake. Even if you just know something was a mistake, like even without knowing how to fix it, like just knowing what the mistake was or where it was, that gives you direction. So from that first kind of longer form video, we started going more in that direction. I started editing the videos. And we started and I started noticing basically the model of Mr. Beast, where you put a ton of work into every single video. You try not to waste even like a second of people's time, and it works really, really well. So anyway, yeah, so I dove into editing. You guys can see the first videos are like really quite bad in comparison to the more recent ones. I did them all myself until very recently. I found a guy, Ishan, that is absolutely wonderful. And he's also like me, that he's like researching and like trying to improve all the time. So it was a perfect match. And yeah, so he did the stretching video. And what was the other? Some other videos he's working on now. He also did another video for me that isn't out yet. And then there might have been one more. But the rest of them were me for quite a while. I got quite good at it. And yeah, the thing is, you just like, you pick it up. And there's a lot of like cinematography. It's a whole discipline, right? But it's like, you know, with movement, like for so many years, I've gotten very good at like picking up new disciplines and like diving into them. So this is just another one. Yeah. And Grant, you should learn too, man. either learn, or if you have the money, like find someone good to edit for you and focus on like having valuable content and like creating it. Excellent. Scare says, back to barefoot / movement shoes. Which would you recommend and what to consider? I was hoping you'd go a little more into detail as to why they're good and stuff. Yeah, so first, I'll just mention really quick, I've been playing with the idea, I have the idea in my head of like a shoe, imagine a minimalist shoe, and it has like the top section, right? From the top, if you see the shoe, like you see someone wearing the shoe, and it just looks like they're wearing normal shoes, right? But the bottom would be like, there would be no bottom, you know? It would just be like the shell of a shoe. So it would look like you're wearing shoes, but really you're like basically barefoot. Yeah, Grant, yeah, the program's DaVinci Resolve, and it's free. Like the free version is fantastic, so that one's awesome. Yeah, so barefoot trumps any minimalist shoe. Any minimalist shoe. I've noticed such a strong difference, so much more than you'd think, between being barefoot and like look at these shoes. I've like destroyed these, right? These are Vivo Barefoots. I've had these for a while. I've really destroyed them. They had a small like 3mm, I think it's 3 millimeters, and then a 3mm insole. I ripped out the insole, so it's even thinner, and then it's even thinner than that because I've like worn the fuck out of it. And so that's really good, right? But because the problem is, depending on where you live, if you're not in like a beach town or something, you have to be wearing shoes for a lot of places, right? Like you can't walk into a nice restaurant barefoot. As much as I'd like to, you can't do that. They'll kick you out in a lot of places, right? So there's some compromise involved. Of course, like there's a lot of places where you can go barefoot, and especially like locations, again, like more beach places. Like I think you can get away with being barefoot more often or almost all the time. And when you can do that, that's wonderful and so good for your feet. Again, like I think I think I covered it at a pretty good level in the Intro to Movement Part 3. Basically, your considerations for shoes are how thick or thin are they? How thick or thin is the sole? Like what's the heel elevation, right? So like imagine, again, like, I don't have my like weightlifting shoes here, but like, okay, imagine this heel had something else under it, right? Then the problem is your Achilles tendon is always shortened. Like anytime you're standing, your Achilles tendon is shortened by however much that heel lift is, right? It's a few millimeters, but up to, I mean, in the most dramatic cases, up to an inch. But that's an inch that your Achilles tendon is shortened constantly, right? Constantly. And of course, we're sitting and there's no load on it whatsoever. So, you know, that's already a problem. So you want it as thin as possible. You want no heel elevation, no heel lift, or drop, whatever term you want to use. And as thin as possible so your feet can feel the floor. Like that's a really big thing. And then also like flat. You don't want any arch support. Like that. I don't think I mentioned that in the Intro to Movement video. If you have arch support, there are muscles in your, like there are different, oh, the autofocus, you can get the autofocus on my foot here. There we go. So there's different arches in the foot, right? So we always think about like this arch, the sort of, I believe longitudinal arch it's called, but there's also other arches, right? Like there's a transverse arch in the foot. And so if you have arch support built into your shoes, Like it's again, it's a brace. Like there are muscles that go through here, right? And it's actually again like one of those things that made us human is having springy feet was a very important step in our evolution. Again, it allowed us to run and walk much more efficiently, which really was our largest like competitive advantage, right? So when you add arch support, yeah, it feels nice if your feet are already destroyed, but guess what? Like you're putting a Band-Aid on you're casting the problem, right? Like it's not a Band-Aid, like it's because you're not just covering it, like you cement it, right? You prevent it from being able to get better because there's no demand on those tissues, right? There's no demand on the tissues, specific adaptation to impose demand. There's no demand, guess what? There's no adaptation, or the adaptation is to stiffen up, weaken up, etc., and sensitize. Yeah, again, we're gonna try to move fast with the questions rather than deep. So that'll be it for that. And let me know if you want more detail on any specific thing. So you guys can feel free, you know, like ask multiple variations of the same question, or like say, you know, talk more about this, right? Yes. Okay. Windy Graphics says, what are some ways to improve thoracic rotation? I feel like throwing athletes have really good thoracic rotation plus extension. And this is funny. I would disagree. I would disagree. And it's funny because like it's probably a little harder for you guys to see here, but the window I've got, your little icon here is pretty big, and you know it's this guy like sort of winding up to throw, and you can see the thoracic extension there, right? Like how much thoracic extension is going on there? Not much. It's not much. And again, like sometimes adaptations to certain things aren't mobility, it's tightness, right? One of the adaptations to running and jumping is Achilles tendon stiffness, right? Imagine you go to jump, you go to, how am I going to show this? Okay, let's imagine this is my foot, right? You go to jump. Imagine, and this is the toes, this is the heel. If this just collapses down, right? Like the more, okay, so, all right, so let's say there's something like this, right? Where this string is like the Achilles tendon. So you go to jump, and there's load, right? We put load in the ball of the foot. Jump or run or whatever. The ball of the foot lands. The tighter this Achilles tendon is, the more it allows your ankle to rebound. So imagine this Achilles tendon is more lax. That's not going to be helpful, right? So, I mean, it may be helpful for other things. You know, you go to squat, for instance, right? You need that Achilles tendon mobility to get the forward knee travel to get deep into the squat. But there's a lot of things where it's a disadvantage to have extra range of motion. Certainly without strength, right? Certainly without strength. And that's definitely one of the reasons my Achilles tendons are so tight. My ankles are so tight. Because I was doing tons of sprinting and explosive work for a long, long time. And then, you know, the other part was like wearing running shoes, right? I figured, you know, everyone always says like, oh, you need running shoes to run. So I was like, well, like, I guess I'll just wear them all the time then, right? Like, why would I wear shoes I couldn't run in? Well, you know, after years of that, again, Achilles tendon stiffens up. I definitely suffered that. So second half of the question, I don't think throwing athletes have really good thoracic extension for sure. nor much of the rotation. I think the best way to do it is, it depends on the sport. One of the best ways to do it is bridge rotations. Yeah, okay. This is a different sort of style. So I'm gonna try to move fast here. Again, you can keep asking variations, but yeah, go on to the next one. Okay, back to comments. You guys keep throwing in some questions here. Okay, so this one's interesting. So this guy, Philip Lehman, says, this is on the transformative meditation video. He says, I must say I kind of made the opposite experience. I practiced focused meditations where you focus on one mantra like Om for years, but when it comes to problem solving, in my experience, movement is the key. Because solving problems requires creativity, and when I go outside and walk through the forest, that's when I get the best ideas and new perspectives on solving a current problem. I've learned it in my physics studies. Whenever I got stuck in a task, I did go outside, and I almost always came back with a new solution approach. Helped me a lot. Yeah, this is really interesting. So, if you guys haven't seen the meditation video, definitely check that out. Basically, I'm pushing for, in a lot of situations, a different style of meditation where instead of just focusing on the breath, you add a little bit more work before and after. So instead of just trying to exclude the thoughts and just, okay, thoughts come, let them go, back to the breath over and over, you would instead, you take the time at the beginning to write down like a problem that you want to work on, right? Something that's bothering you generally. And then you take the time of your meditation to focus on that thing, right? And so you, instead of like trying to push the thoughts away, you channel them, right? You channel them towards a problem of some sort. And in my experience, that's been far, far, far more effective than just a standard sitting meditation, right? The kind of traditional kind. So Philip brought up a really good point here. So I think this is a really interesting thing, right? So maybe it could very easily be the case where if you're sitting down in a certain environment for a long time, like thinking about a problem, which I assume is what happens with, I think he said physics? Yeah, physics studies, yeah. Sometimes I think that the change in environment itself is helpful. And then the bigger thing, though, is when you're sitting down like that for a long time, or just generally like not moving for a while, you're getting a lot less blood flow to the brain, right? And so it's harder for the brain to do anything. It's designed for movement, right? It's designed for movement. And so when you're not moving, it's not getting as much blood as it would need to optimally function. So probably you find you go for a walk, you change the environment, that generally helps with creativity. You get more blood flow, and and that helps with the problem solving. Yeah, so that's a really great point. I noticed there was one day I I'd been playing chess with my old roommate Chris, and he was pretty good. We'd have good back and forth matches, and one day we would just kind of like leave the chessboard there, and then like we'd just like I make a move in the morning, and he like came back at lunch, he made a move, and at some point I make another. We're just kind of playing all the time, right? And so one day we were playing, and I like needed to do my workout, right? Because I'm doing these double day Edo programming, and so I would play a move with him, and then I would go do my set of like straight arm work. I think it was like straight arm and maybe handstands. It was definitely straight arm work though, and it was so interesting because you would think, like, he's sitting there the whole time, and we're generally fairly evenly matched. But I would go sit there for like 30 seconds, pick a move, and then go like do some like hard planching and front levers. And I'd come back, and I'm like breathing a little, right? Like there's some, it's hard isometrics, it's not cardio, but the blood is going a fair amount. And I beat him pretty good that day, you know? Like, and it was so interesting because not only did I beat him by like a far wider margin than normal, but I was also like taking like way less time like at the chessboard, you know? So he was just there the whole time. And I would just, you know, look at it for a little bit, play a move, go do a strength set, look at it, play a move. And that to me was the biggest kind of example of this, like, yeah, getting the blood flow going, really, especially getting blood going helps get more blood to the brain, and I think that really helps with problem solving a lot. Yeah, so I just did a workout before this, and I think that helps perfectly. And during the live stream, that was another time I really noticed. So I was thinking that the last live stream, of which there is no record, pretty much, I was like, I'm answering questions for 24 hours straight, right? So I'm 12. I started at 9, and so, oh geez, it must have been. It was getting like pretty late at night, like not morning yet, but it was probably like 10 or 11 at night, and I was really like slowing down. And so I was like, okay guys, you know, I'm gonna do some locomotion sets in between these questions. And it was so interesting because like I had really felt like cognitively like I was slowing down, but I did those sets, and all of a sudden like I was like sharp again, you know? And it was so cool, especially like with such a like long thing to be focused and like answering questions for even just the 12 hours at that point, but the 24. But that little bit of exercise and doing more sort of throughout after that really helped dramatically. Like I felt much more awake for one. And I felt so much sharper. It was really, really cool. I wish there was a record of it, but there isn't. So that's unfortunate. Okay. Scare says, should weightlifting shoes have any specific requirements? Good question. So weightlifting shoes, the biggest thing you're looking at is you want them to be super solid, right? You don't want any give at all, right? Again, we talked about like the Achilles tendon stiffness, right? And the heel just collapsing there. One of the other things, if you're lifting and you've got a shoe with that heel lift, you've got like running shoes on, right? And there's like a big like cushion under your heel. That cushion is going to compress when you're lifting. You know, say you deadlift 200, you squat 200 pounds, right? Like you're adding your body weight plus 200 pounds, a lot of that pressing straight into the heel. And now that it makes that shoe an unstable surface, essentially, which is not what you want when you're lifting heavy weights. And generally not what you want at all when you're doing strength training. So the first thing is it's got to be solid. It's got to be super solid. It can't have any like squishiness. From there, you want a heel lift that works for you. For me, that's kind of as much as possible. Again, the more heel lift, it essentially gives you more dorsiflexion, right? It allows the foot to lift higher, and so based on that angle, the knee can travel farther forward, and because the knee can travel farther forward, your hips can sit down kind of properly, your torso can be more upright rather than leaning forward, which, especially for Olympic weightlifting, being able to catch the bar upright is like enormous. Like it's you try to catch a snatch with your torso here, you're done, right? You don't have a chance. So it's really helpful for that. Yeah, and it's interesting as well because most Olympic weightlifters, like high-level competitive ones, they have tons of ankle mobility, right? You see them like barefoot or without shoes, they've got like beautiful, beautiful squats. But they wear the weightlifting shoes anyway with quite a bit of heel lift. And I think that the reasoning for that is basically it's never a bad idea with Olympic weightlifting to be able to have a little more, or very rarely, let's say, to be able to have room for a little more like forward knee travel and catching more upright. Like it's such an advantage that the disadvantage to underdoing it is so much more than the disadvantage to overdoing it. So even though they have all the ankle mobility they need, they also do it with a heel lift as well. This is kind of all the requirements. And then also, like, yeah, if you want something that looks nice and is comfortable, maybe. Scare says, what are some fitness/movement goals you have, things that you haven't been able to achieve yet? Great question. There's a lot. There will always be a lot. One of those, I'm that sort of person. So one is I want the soldier. So it's like a one-arm handstand, but instead of like the legs being straddled, the legs are together. And I can do that for a few seconds. But what I really want is to be able to get the legs together, and then instead of using the other hand to like rebalance here, you take that hand all the way like to your hip. And so that hand is pretty much out of the rebalancing equation, and you really just rebalance. And your legs are pretty much out of the equation too, because they're both together, and you're mostly just rebalancing with that arm and your hand. That's one that's it's overkill for sure. Everyone would say it's overkill. I even agree with it. But that's on the bucket list, right? And I'm at this point not too far. So there's that. A Stalder on the floor. That's another one that's been evading me for a while that I'm starting to close in on. Yeah, and 5 Stalders maybe. What else? We'll get the one arm chin on both sides. Get that comfortable. That'd be real nice. There's a list somewhere. I generally, goals are, I'm always a little iffy about goals because it's a tricky thing if you don't achieve them, that it can be discouraging. But you also want to have something that you're working forward to, right? Working towards. So I generally like to work more like in a direction. Like for instance with jiu-jitsu, I don't have goals. Like I want to get better. I maybe have some targets of like people that I wanna catch them. But yeah, like it's not like, oh, I want to get like my purple belt, or like it's not like I want to get this belt in whatever time, or like I want to be able to do like this berimbolo, whatever. I want to generally get better. right? And continue getting better there. And same with dance. And those are two of my kind of biggest focuses, dance and jiu-jitsu, as wide categories. Those are two really, really fantastic areas for focus. Thanks, Scare. Jimmy says, hi, Bren. I was wondering if you could compare training for calisthenics static elements like front lever and planche versus heavy lifts like deadlifts and squats, and if you enjoy one over the other. Excellent. So yeah, so there's one element of static isometrics versus like dynamic moves like concentric, eccentric. And even like it could be in the same thing, right? Like we compare a planche versus like a planche press, right? Which is like some real stuff there. Yeah, and then the other thing is, are we talking upper body or lower body, right? Because you mentioned upper body calisthenics things, and lower body lifts. How about this, Jimmy? I'm assuming you're still here. Can you specify a little more, and then we'll come back to this. And if you don't, I'll come back to this anyway, and I'll try to get through it, through the different sections of this. Grant says, what's your take on where to start people with a practice? Ooh. Old school move culture was basically strength, mobility, handstand. But now there's less emphasis on physical prep. Where do you start? Yeah, wonderful question, Grant. You know, it's still, for me, different with every person. I'm not at the point where, you know, I'm going to say, I have this, you know, this is the best for everyone, right? That said, I generally like to start people with things a lot earlier than a lot of Ito's people and Ito's method do. One of the things I figure is like, look, specific adaptation to imposed demands, right? These moves are never going to be perfect. They're never going to be perfect, you know? So a lot of it is just like, why should we hold people back so much to even start working on these things? Like, it's not like, you know, it's not like you can get a one-arm chin-up and a deficit handstand push-up, you know, 5 reps of each on each side, and like now when you start doing your locomotion, you'll be good, right? Like, it's not like that at all. Like, you would actually still be horrible if you hadn't done any. So I try to kind of start people with all of it early. You have to be, the main consideration then is you have to be careful with injury. So, and that depends on what someone's physical practice is. That's my big kind of distinction right now, is like, how much is someone practicing right now? And so if they're coming off the couch, and not just coming off the couch, but like they haven't really been training before, then we need to be really careful about volume. And maybe we do emphasize the physical prep more. But I still think we can do things like start people with even improvisation, like even like improvising with dance, very, very early and like almost immediately. Because it's going to be such a long thing anyway. Ishan says, hi, Bren, I just woke up. He says it's lagging. Let me know if it's still lagging. I can reduce the bit rate a little more. Okay. Damn. I was really hoping that we keep the bit rate high here. Let's go video 4,000. Okay. That should be a little better. everything should be, that should be good now. Okay. Thoughts on, Faraday says, what are your thoughts on if I only do rock climbing? You shouldn't do that. But it's a great question. I think it's a really good question, and I think, I don't know if a lot of people would ask this, but certainly a lot of people are doing it and things like this. So this is really great. Oh, and then he goes on. He says imbalances wise. What? Okay, so I'm gonna start with the first part of that. So anytime you're only doing one thing like this, even if it's like rock climbing is a great discipline. You know, I love rock climbing. It's a lot of fun. It's I'm not sure if I would say creative, but it involves a good chunk of movement intelligence, which is a huge, boon for any discipline, because a lot of them these days involve no movement intelligence, right? Strength, mobility, right? We're working on a lot of good things. And a lot of people make this argument for every discipline. It like drives me crazy a little bit. When you ask people like why they do a certain thing, why do you do rock climbing? They might say, oh, or actually someone said this to me not too long ago. They're like, oh, it works the whole body, right? Yeah, I mean, kind of. It kind of does, right? In a way, though, you're working the whole body no matter what you're doing, right? Like I'm sitting here and like, are any of my muscles like completely not doing anything, right? Like for extended periods of time, like you sit back, it's hip extension, right? The glutes probably did a tiny bit, a little, right? A little. And so you could make the argument that, yeah, you're using the whole body. But the thing becomes, which systems are you putting demand on, real demand, right? And that's when you start to sitting, oh, you're not putting real demand on anything, right? Pretty much nothing. Maybe there's something, but pretty much nothing. And when you look at rock climbing like that, what are the systems we're not putting demand on? We're not putting serious demand on lower body strength. We're not putting serious demand on lower body explosiveness. We're not putting serious demand on any pushing strength, right? There's no demand on any sort of interfacing with a partner. You're interfacing with the rock, but it's different because the rock stays there or the wall stays there. There's a lot of things. There's no object manipulation. Like there's a lot of things that no matter how good you get at rock climbing will never develop. And in addition, when you do something like that, where you're not developing certain systems at all, and the other thing is, I need to develop like a term for this. But right now, let's call it a chaotic discipline, right? So let's call rock climbing, let's use this term, a chaotic discipline. And the thing is, and this is generally a good thing, rock climbing is a chaotic discipline where, okay, what are we demanding, right? We're demanding a lot on finger strength and pulling strength, sometimes mobility, especially maximal strength, but sometimes a little bit of endurance there, right? Especially of the grip. But the demand we're placing on it is totally chaotic all over the place, right? It's not like weightlifting, powerlifting, where I did 205-pound cleans for sets of 2. I did 7 sets of 2 the other day. And, on like Tuesday, I'm going to aim for 8 sets of 2 that weight, right? I had the exact weight, volume, intensity, all checked out, exactly what I want, and I'm going to modify it exactly the way I want to be like I can change whatever parameters I want, however I want, and have full control over it. Rock climbing isn't like that, right? Like you don't get to control how much demand on your biceps are you going to have today, right? Like you can kind of control how much climbing you do, but like some days are just randomly like really going to use the bicep, right? You might be climbing a certain route over and over, get stuck on a certain like bouldering problem, and you're really focusing on it, and it might be a particular one where you're using a lot of upper body strength, maybe on one side. And the problem with that is it's easier to get adaptation to these biological systems with like programming, right? When you know what you're doing and when you control those variables, right? So like for weightlifting, I'm not going to go in tomorrow and try to clean 400 pounds for 10 sets, right? I'm just not. And so my body isn't going to be exposed to those like crazy loads that I haven't seen before in that way. And chaotic disciplines are the opposite. You'll randomly be exposed to those crazy loads, and then you'll randomly not be exposed to those loads at all, right? In each area, it could be the fingers, could be like your left pinky. You know, it'll be random things all the time. So these chaotic disciplines are often really good because they involve and require and develop a lot more movement intelligence. But the problem is when you're just doing that one thing, and also because of that, they're generally a lot more fun and engaging, right? And that's really, really important. But if that's the only thing you're doing, your injury risk is so much higher. It's so much higher, right? Because you're not controlling the variables, right? There's just one day, like jiu-jitsu is an even better example of a chaotic discipline, right? Where rock climbing, you have some control, right? You could say, oh, like, I'm not going to climb this route anymore. You're not. You look at the route and you're generally just going to say, like, I'm going to climb this thing, right? And you do whatever it takes to climb it. But you could theoretically say, I'm not going to climb it in this certain way, or today I'm only going to try this route twice, blah, blah, blah. Jiu-jitsu, it's even more so. You don't really control what your opponent does at all. And so one day your opponent is going to pull guard. Another day he's going to throw you with an Uchimata, right? And had you been thrown with the Uchimata all the time at lower intensities, it's not a big deal. But because it happens randomly and can happen at these huge amplitudes, it's chaotic, right? It can happen at these huge amplitudes. That's where we run into this like risk and injury risk. And to me, that's the biggest downside to only doing one discipline like rock climbing that I would consider here, we'll use the term chaotic discipline. If you only do one thing and it's a chaotic discipline, you really run a lot of risk. It's hard to maintain that over time, right? But you can cover that by just add some like accessory weightlifting work, right? Some accessory strength work, and you cover those bases. Especially as you gradually work your strength training demands to be greater than your potential demands. So the chaotic discipline, say the demands on a certain joint, they're fluctuating all over the place, right? Like between here and here. But let's say when you're doing your strength training, you're working at an intensity up here, and you're gradually building that up. But the chaotic discipline is demanding it's random within this is the zone. You're prepared for much more, right? So you have a buffer zone, you're good. Versus if you just adapt to that sort of chaotic situation, you never know when you're going to have a huge amplitude of demand on any system whatsoever and, run into problems. So, yeah, that's the big thing. It's not to say that it's imbalances is again, muscle imbalances have a small effect on injury risk. So I generally don't care about muscular imbalances. I don't. There is a story about that, but we'll skip it right now. So yeah, the bigger thing is the thing you're doing a chaotic discipline, and if so, you got to cover it with something that you have control over the variables, some strength training, and develop all your systems to a level where you have not only the capacity to sustain any of those chaotic demands, but a buffer above it, right? Great question. Going back to the extension question. This is a shame. Here's a video on a thrower. I think he has a lot more extension than the average, but I could be wrong. But there's no video. So yeah, send me the video. Yeah, you can. My email is bvezerolu. It's just my last name, 001@gmail. Send me the video. I don't know if I'll be able to get to it now, but I will check it out later. And of course, so you will see people that have a lot more extension than average, but like the thing is like sort of what is the average and how does that relate to the sport, right? Like they're gonna be freaks in every sport of all different kinds, right? The thing is with a sport, like especially competitive ones like baseball, at the higher levels you start seeing exclusion of attributes that don't matter or are detrimental, or especially are detrimental, right? Like so one of the things like with Moneyball, right? If you guys have seen that movie, they found there were a few batters where like they were like super slow, and so like a lot of scouts just ignored them. But like statistically it worked out basically. So it didn't even matter how slow they were because they were hitting so well, right? But then you think about something like that. So if you're a really good batter, not that I know that much about baseball, but from my understanding, you're really good at a very important part of the sport, and that could remove the importance of you being horrible at a part that isn't nearly as important, right? So yeah, so you'll randomly see people with a lot of with I don't know about a lot of thoracic extension, but with a fair amount. But like for instance in dance, in contemporary dance, you'll rarely see people that don't have a lot of thoracic extension, right? Because it's an important part of the sport. And generally, I don't think you see that at all in baseball. Not anywhere near the same degree. Yeah, great question. Okay, Jimmy says, my bad, I was curious since I've recently started going to the gym. Even though I've been doing calisthenics for 2 years, the weights feel so heavy when I do weighted exercises like lat pull downs. But at the same time, my elbow tendonitis flares up, feels alleviated in comparison to regular pull-ups. So I guess I was talking about upper body strictly. Yeah. Yeah. Wendy, yeah, I don't think, for whatever reason, I don't think you can send links on YouTube chats. So I think, so you said it's a link above. It's not here. So that's unfortunate, but yeah, it's because people like spam links, right? So send that email. But Jimmy, yeah, so I mentioned in the last live stream that the one gone and disappeared on us, that I have a suspicion that there is a difference between a fundamental difference in the way the body adapts to weighted exercises and body weight exercises. Like, I have a suspicion that, like, when you think about it, right? Like rock climbing is a great example. What is the demand for pulling strength in high-level rock climbing, right? And like, I know people are going to say, oh, you know, like it's a lot of technique, right? And it is. But they're using that pulling strength all the time. They're climbing all the time. Why are they not super muscular, right? Why are we not seeing climbers that are crazy with, you know, huge biceps and forearms, right? Let alone everything else. But at least they should have like huge arms, right? Because they're using those muscles all the time, and they're using them with, at times, a lot of load, right? So I suspect the reason for that, and when you think about it, of course, any muscle they add is extra weight that they have to then pull up the rock, you know, boulder, wall, whatever, right? Whatever they're climbing at the time. So it's advantageous for them to have a lot of strength, but be as skinny as possible, and especially like really tall and lanky, right? So you see guys like Adam Ondra. It's literally like I don't know if there's a reason why, like, his neck is super long, and I don't know if there's a reason why that could be like advantageous for rock climbing, like if he's using it to like counterbalance certain problems. But he's super long and lanky, right? And very like skinny for his frame. And so that allows him to like reach for a lot of things, right? But also not be too heavy, so he doesn't have that much weight to carry. Really advantageous for climbing. Versus bodybuilders at times can be even weaker than rock climbers. But I mean, there are a lot more. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of reasons why bodybuilders would be far more muscular than climbers, right? Diet being the biggest one. That most bodybuilders, any serious bodybuilder, pays a huge attention to their diet and eating a lot, right? Where climbers generally, I think, don't. You know, they eat like birds, is the saying my mom uses. But I suspect, in addition to all the factors that you would normally say, that would normally classically make sense, that there's also some sort of factor where lifting an external object, your body realizes at some level that adding extra muscular weight is not a disadvantage. It's an advantage. And it adapts differently. It is, for whatever reason, more able to build muscle, or more prone to building muscle in response to it, because for whatever reason it knows that it's more advantageous, right? Yeah, so with bodybuilders, powerlifters, even Olympic weightlifters, right? Although Olympic weightlifters have weight classes, and so that's a separate thing, but like they're generally a lot far more muscular than climbers. Yeah, so the other thing that's really nice about weighted exercises, again, like a little bit we talked about like the chaotic disciplines, right? Calisthenics is not really a chaotic discipline, but it is a little, you know, like we don't get all of the control of loading that we would normally, that we normally have and love to have in weightlifting, right? Like I've got all the fractional plates and like little wrist weights. So if I want to add half a pound to my squat tomorrow, I can, for exactly the same reps, for exactly the same range of motion. I could do exactly the same tempo. exactly the same number of sets, right? With calisthenics, it's hard to have that level of control, right? Like imagine you're doing like a chin-up. What are you going to do? You can do one. Imagine you can do one chin-up, right? This is a situation for a lot of people. They could do one chin-up. How do you progress from there? Two chin-ups. Going from 1 to 2 is a huge jump. Huge jump. So, like, there are things we can do, right? We can change the tempo. We can change the sets. But the best way to control that load is to add an external weight. Like what I find one of the best ways to bridge that gap is not to try to get from 1 to 2, but to add half a pound, right? Add quarter pound to the chin up. And you can keep doing that. And as you get to, depending on your body weight, you work your way up until you're adding 5 pounds, and that's equivalent to 2 chin ups, right? Now you could do 2. So I think everyone should be lifting weights to some degree, especially calisthenics athletes. They should be doing lower body weightlifting as well. So this is something we've talked about where calisthenics and bodyweight strength training is really good for a lot of things. But again, because we don't have the control over the loading to the level that we'd like, it's certainly not as good for accessory exercises, some like rotator cuff things. And also because we don't get to really control the load to a large degree, right? Like what are you going to do that's triple body weight? You can only, you're going to do a lower body exercise. You can only use one leg. Like you can't do like half a leg, right? Like versus when you're doing a squat, you go to 200 pounds, no problem. You can go to 300, 400. You keep going until pretty much 1,200 pounds, where you get to the limit of like most barbells, right? So like you essentially don't have a limit of whatever weight you want, and within that spectrum, you can choose whatever weight. Like you don't have to just do like 10-pound increments. You get the 2.5 pounds, you do 5-pound increments. You get the fractional plates, and now you have half a pound increments, right? That's another thing everyone should have is a little set of fractional plates. Very, very, very useful. Faraday says, if rock climbing is chaotic in its nature, but also very random in the positions that it would put you in, how would you go ahead to do strength training and increasing that threshold? Pull-ups feel linear. Great question. So you have to ask yourself, this is something I think about, I have thought about a lot with jiu-jitsu. So you have to ask yourself, what are the systems that are getting all of this demand, right? What are the systems that are under demand in this chaotic discipline, right? What are the systems that are most important? So for instance, like imagine you really screwed up. You say rock climbing, I'm climbing and I need to be able to support myself on my legs. So I should be doing like tons of like lower body weightlifting, right? Not like a little bit, like an enormous amount. And like that's all you do, right? That's your accessory thing. What you find is you do that and you would find that one, you didn't need any more lower body strength, right? So that's not helpful unless you're like extremely, extremely weak. It won't be helpful at all. So there's that. And then additionally, as part of that adaptation process, you've gained muscle, you're now heavier, and now guess what? You've done a bunch of time and you've made progress with your weightlifting, but for your particular goal of doing something to improve your climbing, you've gone backwards, right? So you have to first find something where you know that it's really important and it's going to be helpful to develop this thing. So
and these systems, right? So I'll give you another example. Say for climbing, you decide that, you're doing like a lot of top roping, right? And so, okay, let's use jiu-jitsu. Well, okay, let's go back to climbing. So you're doing a lot of top roping, and say like you get a little tired at the end, right? And so you figure to yourself, oh, I'm getting tired, so I should be working on my cardio. And so you do tons of cardio. And if you do that, what you'll then find is it's not that helpful on its own, because the real problem was you weren't using like good technique. And so as you continue just using tons of strength, that's very demanding cardiovascularly. So even if you get in much better cardio shape, it won't help you much in climbing, even with like not feeling as tired. And even if you do enough cardio to like surpass that level, which wouldn't be too hard because I don't think climbing is very cardio intensive, you would then find that it's not that helpful. Like you're generally rarely going to be limited with your climbing ability by your cardio, right? You're going to be limited by your grip strength. You're going to be limited by your grip strength, your grip strength, your grip strength, your grip strength, your pulling strength, and then of course if we're putting strength aside, above those is you're limited by your skill, right? You're limited by your skill in climbing much more than those specific attributes. So you want to work on the skill a lot. That's kind of a separate thing, but it needs to be said because it's the most important. And then you find the systems that are the most under demand, right? So let's say, okay, what are the systems? I'm going to take a stab at it, right? So from my experience with climbing, I would say, again, it's maximal isometric grip strength in different positions. So grip strength is very specific. So you'd find like the barbell weightlifting grip strength, gripping a 28 to 29 millimeter barbell here, this like crushing grip, is not going to get you that much transfer to a lot of these different rock climbing grips, right? These like crimp grips with, different amounts of fingers. So you need to train those and develop those, and they have hang words for that. And a lot of people work with that. People already, this is, a lot of the important good ideas, people are already doing them, right? Because climbing's a fairly competitive sport. And I think I've heard a little that it might be in the Olympics soon. So we're going to get even more competitive. Yeah, so grip strength, different variations. Probably pulling strength as well. Depends how strong you are. For me, for instance, I don't think training more pulling strength would be productive for my climbing ability. Mobility would generally be helpful, especially I think hip mobility. Again, depending on how flexible or inflexible you are, right? You wouldn't need to be a contortionist, but mobility is generally quite helpful in climbing, and you see that at a high level because, like, what's your sign? Like, when you're looking for these like demanding systems, one of the biggest things you want to pay attention to is how good are the high-level people at these systems, right? So if you decide like, so for instance, if you thought that climbing is very demanding on your cardio and that you should be doing cardio, but you find, say you go talk to Alex Honnold and you find, say you go for a run with him, right? And you find that actually he gets tired after like 800 meters. That hasn't affected his climbing ability. So that would be a very strong sign to you that if cardio was important and cardio specific, so his sort of running cardio was important for climbing, he would never have been able to get to this level of climbing with this level of cardio, right? So that would be a clear sign that's not important.
Jiu-jitsu, another example, where people say strength isn't important, but you look at the high-level people, you look at ADCC, what do you see? They're all very muscular. They're all very strong, doing weightlifting, right? Doing strength training. So despite the overall culture of, like, don't use strength, right? Like in jiu-jitsu culture, like you're strong, like you're so strong is like pretty much an insult. Like pretty much. Like, because it pretty much means like, oh, you beat me because like you're really strong, not because you're good at jiu-jitsu, right? So with a culture where strength is frowned upon to that degree, the people at the highest level are still quite strong and doing a good chunk of strength training. That's a good sign that if you want to improve at jiu-jitsu, spending your time doing strength training is a good idea, right? And not a waste of time. Yeah. So you don't necessarily have to train in chaotic ways to develop these systems, right? Like generally that's, like I wouldn't say that to develop your pulling strength for climbing that you want to go on, that you want to necessarily go on some sort of like bouldering problem and then like just do like, I don't know, pull-ups on these different things, right? As your exclusive strength training. Actually, as I'm saying that, it's not as bad of an idea as I might have thought earlier. But you do want to have some linear things as well, right? So like maybe you do that, you do your you do climbing with just your arms, you you climb and like do pull-ups on these different grips as you go. But additionally, you also work like weighted chin-ups, weighted pull-ups, muscle-up progressions, etc. Right? Your good linear work. Dare Salet says, "Hi Bren, may I ask what you do for a living? I'm 22 and considering pursuing a career in functional fitness / movement type of coaching. I'm confident in my skills, but have no certification so far." Hey, so I'm a full-time movement teacher. That's what I do. That's what I've been doing for since I graduated, since I finished my undergrad in 2015. So I do personal training. I have been doing group classes. And I'm starting to work more into online coaching and online courses now. I don't have any online courses out yet, but when I do, you guys will be the first to know. Yeah, so it depends what you want to do, what you want with your life, right? What your interests are, what you're good at. There was I had a client actually that brilliant guy, and he mentioned something to me of like, I forgot what he said, but he was talking basically about like with sort of salary, with like how much money you make, like certain things it pays a lot more to like be in the top 10%, right? So he was talking about like, imagine like computer science engineers, coders, blah blah blah, of all different sorts, right? Like your average is getting paid like somewhere near 6 figures depending on where they are. So if you're in the top 10% of skill of that area, you're going to make like a lot more, right? Versus other things, right? Like imagine you're a painter. If you're in the top 10% of people who paint, you're going to make probably very, very little, and you've got to get to that top, to kind of be able to sustain yourself. So movement can sort of, and fitness is generally more in that direction. You can make plenty of money. It's not that hard, but yeah, it depends. So it depends. Like, do you need to make a lot of money? Like, is that something that's like super important to you, that you have like a really nice car and blah blah blah? Or do you want to like have sort of a more fulfilling life and career where you're doing more helpful things, or things that mean more to you, right? That's sort of a big consideration there. And so if you want to do fitness, you want to do movement, we actually have a few people were asking about this sort of stuff. So we actually have a video coming out with some tips for movement teachers fairly soon, hopefully. But my recommendation would be like, be sure that this is sort of what you want to do. Well, maybe not actually. I would say dip your toes in a little, right? Whatever career you're in now, if you're a student, you're about to graduate and you're going in a certain direction, I would say maybe you keep going in that direction, but like dip your toes in and try it. Like, try teaching, take a few clients. And so there's a separate thing of like getting qualified, which is very, very, very important. But once you do that, dip your toes in, start doing a little bit, and see how you like it, you know? You can compare and contrast, right? Like, what is your day-to-day, your day job, and your fitness coaching, movement teaching, etc., those sort of things. And when you build your skill level up enough that you're confident that that's what you want to do, go in that direction. Yeah, if that's what you want to do. Now, the other thing is, if you want to go in the fitness movement direction, I feel this is true for anything, but especially if you're going to do something in the fitness movement direction, be good. Like, you got to be good at what you do. You can't, like, there's so many people that just teach, especially fitness, not movement so much, but fitness much more. Like, they just teach because they like doing it themselves. You know, I like working out, so I'm going to work out with other people and that's how I make money, you know? And it's like, it's horrible. It's horrible because people have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what they're teaching. And other people, you know, you don't know. You trust a fitness professional to know what they're doing. That's what you go to them for. So you may assume that they know what they're talking about when they don't have a clue. And that's really not good for anyone, right? Because a lot of people will catch on. It'll be obvious that you don't know what you're talking about, right? So, yeah. So separately, if and when and how, no matter what you decide for your career, you should become well versed in movement, right? For yourself, and if you want to teach, because it's also like, it's not just about like teaching professionally, right? Like, it's also like, what are you going to do with your kids? Like, if you're going to have kids, what are you going to do with them, right? Like, you want to be able to teach them healthy fitness and movement habits, right? And movement things and disciplines, and guide them in those directions and be a positive example. You don't want to screw that up, you know? So you want to know what you're doing. You don't want to like recommend, you don't want to be saying like, okay, you hurt your arm, like go foam roll for 2 hours, right? Like, it's like, or you don't want the other horrible one. You don't want to tell your kids that that lifting weights is going to stunt their growth, right? We know that's not true anymore. Maybe I think in the scientific literature, it might have just been that they knew that the whole time, but in the public eye, that wasn't clear. And like, you know,
a lot of people just like don't lift weights, don't do strength training when they're young because of it, and it's a big problem. Like it's a big thing. And you start kind of behind, versus you could have been doing that the whole time and have like your bones more developed and blah blah blah. Maybe muscle fiber composition is a little different. Maybe tendons and ligaments develop a little stronger, and of course all sorts of other things, right? Like anyway, so in any case, with whatever you decide to do, you should become good at movement, and be able to teach. So become good at it, understand it, and be able to teach it. These are important skills for us as humans, right? This is very, very important. Yeah, and if it's something you want to do professionally, keep, drilling it, pushing it, getting better, getting better, getting better, getting better. Keep working, yeah. Jimmy says, thank you, Bren. I think I have to sign out now, but I agree on training my lower body and different types of movements, especially if I get injured or stop progressing in calisthenics. Yeah, cool. Take care, Jimmy. Where did your 24-hour Q&A go? Well, so it was public. I think this is a little the direction you're asking. It was public, so we did it publicly. And then YouTube, where it would normally process the stream, and then once it's processed, it would be like you'd be able to see it again after the fact. It just like didn't archive it at all. It looks like. So after like a week of that, where it should have been done in a few days, after a week of like waiting and it's saying not available, and Ishan asking the YouTube support, and they're saying, okay, it wasn't archived at all. I put it as unlisted because in addition to me, of course, I was upset, but because now I have to do this whole thing over again. But people were looking at it, they're clicking on it, and they're like, where's this freaking live stream, right? I want to see like this 24-hour Q&A, like what the hell happened to it? And it's not there. So I put it as unlisted because there's no video file. So it's gone to the wind as far as we know. Very unfortunate, but we'll do everything. We'll do it again. We'll do it better. So I think a lot of people were there. A lot of people remember it. I don't regret it for 1 second. It's hard to say I enjoyed it because it was so grueling and so demanding. Like the 10-hour Q&A, or like this is like nothing, right? But the 10-hour Q&A, that also like wasn't that hard. But the 24 hours, that's like a totally different beast. Like a totally separate world of how hard it was to do. And so hard to say it was fun given how hard it was, but I enjoyed it in a lot of ways. It was really positive in a lot of ways, certainly for me. I think for a lot of other people as well that saw it. And I got to sort of connect with you guys a lot more and like see the questions you guys are asking, and as well as answering them, and see what you guys are interested in, which is super, super, super important. Yeah. It's very unfortunate. If anyone happens to have a screen recording of the Q&A, please contact me. Grant, what do you think the movement world is missing? Could be anything. Yeah,
Another great question from Grant. So I think, so it depends the way we phrase this, right? Movement world or movement culture. The movement culture is like kind of our smaller subsection of the larger thing. By the way, we're at 14% now, so not too much time left. Keep those keep throwing in those questions, and just a little bit more here. But what is the movement world missing? So what I think the movement culture is missing is, to a large extent, grappling. I mean, it's not that it isn't there, but they're not paying attention. So Ito talks about like this sort of like rhizomatic structure of a movement practice, right? That it's like non-hierarchical. It's a non-hierarchical organized structure. It's, if I recall off the top of my head, the understanding of that. And I do have a problem with that, because I don't think all of these different disciplines are of equal value. You know, there are some that I see as much more valuable than others. And for me, the two that are most valuable are dance and specifically grappling, as far as within the world of fighting, specifically grappling, because you're so much more able to train it sustainably, right, at a high intensity. So, and something that I picked up from Susan, that Susan actually taught me, was, or sort of mentioned, and anyway, basically her idea that locomotion and dance are different things, right? And so, like in Ito's world, we do like locomotion, and I've been sort of thinking about like defining it recently, and so locomotion is like, a lot of it is these moves that we've learned, right? These moves that have names: the crab, the au, the hole, the bridge rotation, the bridge circle, blah blah, QDR circle. But there's a difference. Like, you could be doing those and it looks like dancing, right? But there are many styles of dance that are really different from that. And that's a little hard to explain, but like, you know, when you do it, you know, dance has it's much wider. And so for me, I think the definition of locomotion is like, there are multiple definitions, but one is the ability to move from one place to another. And so locomotion, I consider and define basically as doing and connecting moves where your whole body is traveling through space. So for instance, like there was a beautiful dance performance that I saw a long time ago. And it basically started with this woman she was like, sort of like, not like kneeling, but like, you know, she had her like feet sort of like here, right, on the floor. And she just started by like sort of doing this wave with her toes, like back and forth. And my toes are like super clumsy and uncoordinated. But hers, with the way she did this, it was drop dead gorgeous, incredible. Like, it was wonderful. And you know, I saw just the first few seconds of this, and I was like totally in awe, right? That's not locomotion. Like, that's clearly in the world of dance, right?
And so there are many things like that where it's dance, but it's not locomotion. Dance is a wider picture. Locomotion is still wide, right? But dance is actually quite a bit wider. And so the two things I think are not missing, but certainly largely underemphasized, in my opinion, are grappling and dance, right? Like really, not just doing locomotion, but like locomotion plus everything else. And maybe not even doing the locomotion part, right? Like deciding either way. Great question. Thanks, Grant. Thanks for your input. Dare Salat says, thanks for your input. Yeah, wonderful. Farida says, I've been going on daily walks for a while now, and I've realized how nuanced and complex even a simple thing as walking can be if you tune in. Yeah, yeah, exactly. There are a lot of things like walking where we don't realize how complex they really are because we're good at them. Especially in the world of movement, there are tons of those things, right? So like people think like, a lot of people think math is hard, right? But the complexity of a simple, algebra equation is nothing in comparison to something like walking. Nothing, right? Our brains are just, and bodies are just optimized for the movement things. And yet, it still takes us years to learn, well, okay, a large number of months, okay, to learn how to walk, right? It's a very complicated thing. Again, like, we're getting robots that are just figuring it out now, but it's very, very demanding, right? And they can only walk in limited ways. They can't walk like we can, right? It's only limited surfaces. If I want to walk on a flat surface, easy. There's a bump, no problem. I lift my leg up higher. That's a little harder for a robot, right? Well, a lot harder, but they're getting there. But then like different surfaces, right? Like imagine it's rocky and uneven. That's a lot harder. We don't think about how hard, like what you actually have to do at an information processing level to be able to do something as simple as walking, right? Yeah. And then what you find, if you really, depending on how you tune in, you find that if you think about like if you give yourself an internal focus, if you focus on like lifting your foot in a certain pattern, it's going to interfere with the walking, right? That's a internal attentional focus is the term. So yeah, great question. Okay, we're at, what percent are we at here? Faraday says, what do you think about the human gait cycle? Foot placement, hip movements? Great question. I think it's generally highly optimized. It's generally highly optimized. We're generally very good at it. And I think there's a strong tendency to try to overanalyze these things and think that we know better than like the human body when we don't. When we try to overanalyze these things, this is a thing from Intro to Movement Part 3, right? Like, you don't need to know the molecular composition of a soup in order to cook it, right? This thing from Nassim Taleb. And so a lot of people are looking at the human gait cycle, and they're analyzing the molecules of it. They're looking at the different phases in the gait cycle, and they're saying, you know, what type of shoe can we make that is really going to like perfectly optimize, you know, the pronation at this phase of the gait or what. But it generally screws us up, right? Like, we're probably better off with no shoe at all, right? So yeah. Yeah, locomotion is definitely not this. Yeah, I mean, I think it can be, but yes, I'm glad that you get the point that I was going for. Yeah. Will you be doing jujitsu? Ray says, will you be doing jujitsu on Thanksgiving? Maybe. I'll certainly be training. Have you dabbled in street dance at all? Yeah. Grant says, have you dabbled? Oh, we're at 1%. Have you dabbled in street dance at all? Meaning styles like popping, crump, breaking, locking, etc. You're in the Bay, which is the birthplace of popping. There's such crazy street dance culture. Yeah. I have done a little bit of hip hop, or like urban dance, right, is the more like correct term. And I've been meaning to do a lot more because I think it's really, really wonderful. But yeah, I'm actually having, I think my biggest problem is I don't know where like the really good teachers are, or who they are. So if you know any that are in the Bay Area, like hit me up. Like, you want to come visit and do a little popping vacation? Let me know. But yeah, I've been meaning for a long time to get more into hip hop and urban dance, because I think that's I think still one of the biggest areas, the biggest, most valuable areas of movement that to me is relatively underexplored. Like, I really have not fully utilized that, you know? Yeah, that's super cool. Okay. All right, guys. We're at like 0%, so let's see if we can get one more before we die here. Okay, Galib Aminul. Last question from Galib Aminul. He said, what do you think about a movement practice like tricking? If you don't know, tricking is a very taxing sport that makes you flip and twist in the air while combining martial arts kicks. It's very off-axis most of the time. Do you think it can be practiced with a lot of volume, like 5 to 6 hours a day, every day almost? Yeah, so I'm fairly familiar with tricking. I haven't done much of any of it, but very aware of what it is. And my little brother Aaron did a long time of Taekwondo. He's I think a 2nd degree black belt, and he was teaching for a while, and so he was sort of Taekwondo and tricking, right, are like at a high level very closely connected, because in Taekwondo you're not actually fighting anyone, and so like you're kind of just trying to like look cool, right? And so at a high level that becomes doing acrobatics, which is kind of tricking. So yeah, so the thing is with acrobatics, and we'll throw gymnastics into this, and parkour to a degree, and yeah, gymnastics, acrobatics, parkour, free running, and tricking, and taekwondo, wushu, not wushu as much, but like they're all like, there's a lot of similarities with these. As far as what I'm going to say here is, with these acrobatics, it is such high load. It is such high load that there's a lot of injury risk. And I'm very pro loading and stressing the body and going for adaptation. But like we talked about before, with these chaotic disciplines, that's not the formula for adaptation. That's not how we get adaptation. It's how by randomly landing one day like a little bit off with 1,000, 1,500, maybe 2,000 pounds of force for a moment. Like that's not how we adapt, right? That's how we get injured. And so what you see with those communities, especially tricking, is they're very young and they have very high injury risk. Like they in very serious ones, right? Full ACL tears, Achilles tears, blah blah blah. Yeah, so Ito's approach, I know that the battery died here, but I'm going to finish off this question. Ito's approach is, rather than doing these hard acrobatics, we do what's called soft acrobatics. So rather than these flipping and like hard landings, especially like twisting and flipping, we work with softer things and like cartwheel variations and other things where you don't have that hard impact, but you're still like flipping in certain ways, right? Like macaco, the helicopter, all these different cartwheel variations. And so these things, because they're still acrobatic, but because there's so much less impulse and like high impact forces involved, it's a lot more sustainable. So I think that's a much better approach, and it's unfortunate because tricking and those sort of acrobatics are beautiful, but you don't see, even with jiu-jitsu is a fairly high injury risk thing. But you see people doing jiu-jitsu into their 70s and, even 80s sometimes, right? Tricking, you don't see that. It's literally, we're talking a culture of people like 15 to 22, Yeah, so the longevity in that area is extremely limited. And because of that, I do generally recommend people stay a little bit more away from that. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. That was a wonderful, quick little bullet Q&A. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks so much for coming. And yeah, take care.